Good morning on this Sunday, June 14th, and welcome to the Georgia Gang. Another election day nightmare for some Georgians. Also, we take a deep dive into how the hottest races are shaping up as we head toward November. And pressure continues to mount for a hate crimes bill as lawmakers head back to the Capitol tomorrow for 11 days to finish out the session. We're still keeping our distance, but Theron, Phil, Janelle, and Kathy are all here. The debate and discussion begin right now.
From the Fox 5 studios, the Georgia Gang starts now.
Problems with the new voting machines, hours-long waits, and a lack of absentee ballots. Just a few of the major problems voters faced on Tuesday. And then there was the finger pointing.
Voters are upset. We have heard across this state from people of affluence and influence to people who are community leaders to just regular everyday voters.
Civil rights organizations like Rainbow Push, the SCLC, the NAACP, and others say the widespread systematic voting failures will not be tolerated. They plan to take action through litigation, legislation, and education, and are calling for the resignation of Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He blames county elections officials.
Fulton County's had multiple failures, and they should be embarrassed with their performance. They've had months to get ready for this election, and the user error of their team is just unacceptable.
Now, Secretary Raffensperger says all you have to do is look at all the other counties in the state that got it right, including large counties like Cobb. So, Theron, let's start with you. There was a lot of finger pointing Tuesday and Wednesday, and some Democrats are calling for Secretary of State Raffensperger to resign. Do you think that's fair?
Well, I definitely think it's fair to criticize him because at the end of the day, he's the Secretary of State. He's the highest ranking elected official in the state of Georgia that's in charge of administering and supervising elections. But I got to agree with the headline on AJC. This was a complete meltdown, Lori. And we got to make sure that we all come together to make sure that what we saw on Tuesday must never repeat again. It must never be repeated, because what we saw was a combination of people who waited in line for hours because of the dysfunction at the county and at the state level. But I think what I really also want to do is that I want to thank those poll workers, and I want to thank the voters who endured those long hours and actually voted. No one has really sought them out. And then so for Secretary Raffensperger to come out, and he's the one that really started the finger pointing, Lori, to come out and not even thank the poll workers, but quite frankly blame it on them and blame it on the training. And you saw CEO of DeKalb County, Michael Thurman, immediately come back and say, hey, yes, there are problems, but hey, it's not all our fault. And so he is the one that started the finger pointing. He didn't take any full responsibility for what happened. And so I think going forward, I totally agree with Speaker David Ralston, who came out and said that he wants to do a full comprehensive study and sort of really call for some hearings to figure out what happened at the state and at the county. And then lastly, this was not just in Fulton and DeKalb County. Lori, Cobb County had problems too. I talked to a couple commissioners out there. They did. And then the other problem that we saw is that majority of the problems, not all, but the majority of the counties that were affected were counties with predominantly African-American registered voters and voters. And so that's just not a good thing for our state right now.
Phil, let's talk about that, because some of the Democrats are calling this voter suppression because so many of the problems happened at African-American precincts. When you saw the lines where people were waiting for 2, 4, 6 hours, what about that perception?
Well, I will say that I think all of us on the show agree that we had a mess, and predominantly in our two big counties, Fulton and DeKalb County. But the claims of voter suppression, I know that's pushed by Stacey Abrams and all too many Democrats, just is not true. I mean, look at it. Fulton County is a Democrat-dominated county. They have a Democrat majority county commission. They have a Democrat-dominated board of elections directors. I do think that Executive Director Rick Barron of of the elections office needs to be removed. This is, we've all seen Fulton County screw up for how many election cycles now. The new machines basically were not the problem. Fulton County, doesn't matter what machines they're using, they seem to foul up every time. But I would point out that in my old stomping grounds, Augusta, Richmond County, an African-American dominated county commission, elections board, they had very little problems. It can be done. I don't know about DeKalb County. I may defer to Theron on that. I'm not sure of that situation. But I do know that there was a lack of training in Fulton County with regard to some of the workers. Under our state structure, yes, the Secretary of State does have overall responsibility, but the 159 counties ultimately are responsible for training, rightly or wrongly, and the Secretary of State's office did try to train the top people in these counties, but it didn't go to the lower level. And I will echo the call. I think it's great that Speaker Ralston will be doing hearings and investigation, because yes, we cannot have this happen again. And there was no trial run for these machines, and that was unfortunate too.
Janelle, let's discuss this, because Georgia law says it falls upon the counties to carry out the elections. But if you're the state's elections chief, and I always talk a lot about perception because I think in politics it's a lot about perception. The perception is it falls on the Secretary of State to make things run smoothly.
Yeah, you know what? I find it difficult, though, to put all the blame on him, or even majority of the blame on Secretary Raffensperger, only because for the past few months, we have seen commercials, we've seen simulations, we've talked about these machines, we've talked about telling our voters to go test them out, practice it. When it comes to the long lines, have we forgotten that a lot of that has to do with the COVID-19 restrictions that everyone made sure that we had? Of course, when you have people standing 6 feet apart, when you have to clean in between every machine, when you have two-step now process, which is what Democrats want it so badly, then of course you're going to get long lines. So I personally think the long line argument is a moot point. But when it comes to the technical difficulties, I talked to different poll workers, and I do agree with Theron that we need to thank our poll workers for working so hard and putting so many hours into this. But at the same time, there was a lack of training that was taking place that should have happened on the county level. That is very, very true. And then I remember during the governor's race, when we were counting provisional ballots per the request of Stacey Abrams, Fulton County had a long list of foolishness during that time as well. So I'm not necessarily saying that all of this should be put on one corner or the other, but I will say that it's a bit unfair to throw it all on Secretary Raffensperger during this time, because we had a lot of different issues that we have to keep into consideration, like COVID-19 and these type of restrictions.
Kathy, what about Fulton County? Because I can remember as a reporter covering Fulton County 10, 15 years ago with all of the problems. It would be different if it was just Fulton County, right? But, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, the Fulton County issue has been one that preceded Richard Barron. If you'll remember, he was brought in after failures in previous ones. So I think part of the failures in Fulton County can be traced back to the fact that this is the densest county in the state, and it's complicated at best. But having been a candidate in Fulton County, I can tell you it's no fun to be waiting hours and hours and hours to get your votes counted and then be concerned about, whether things went well. So that needs to move forward. But I want to just say a little something about Raffensperger here. At the end of the day, regardless of what happened, we have a presidential election and congressional and Senate elections and the rest of them that are very important to both parties in November. He can move forward now and send absentee ballot requests to every single registered voter in Georgia in those counties that have been settled without a runoff. But he's got to step up to the plate and lead the way to how this is going to get done. And there's a bill in the Senate, Senate Bill 463, that my guess is we'll hear from over the next 11 days, that attempts to remove responsibility from Raffensperger and the Secretary of State's office for managing the elections. That can't happen. There's just no way anybody who's Secretary of State can, defer to 159 states to apply, to to run elections and assume that you're going to get a level playing field and everything's going to be done the same. So I hope people will watch this. I hope people of both parties will demand that Senate Bill 463 requires that the Secretary of State run these elections and assume responsibility. And one last thing, we knew going in that we were going to have problems, and some of those problems could have been addressed, but one I want to just highlight is the electricity needs, the power needs of the new machines really messed up some precincts around the state and caused problems that people kind of knew were going to be a problem. And these are sort of the underlying things that just have to be addressed. We just can't count on, maybe it's going to work out. So watch out for Senate Bill 463. Call your elected representatives.
Okay.
Make sure that the Secretary of State makes sure that every county election is the same.
And we'll be watching. Thank you all. Well, coming up, incumbent Republican Senator David Perdue now knows he'll face Jon Ossoff in November. A look at the major races straight ahead.
Have a question or comment for the Georgia Gang? Email them at georgiagang@foxtv.com.
We can no longer go down a path of authoritarianism, of racism, of corruption. We are better than this, and Georgia is better than this.
That's Democrat Jon Ossoff, who will square off against incumbent Republican Senator David Perdue. Theron, this was a big win for Ossoff because he avoids what would have been a nasty and expensive runoff. What do you think about this?
Oh man, you got to give Jon Ossoff a lot of props. I mean, winning that election against 6 candidates, 2 of whom were very qualified candidates, women, Teresa Tomlinson and Sarah Riggs Amico, who really, quite frankly, Lori, mounted a good campaign against him. But what he was able to do was just game-changing. For him to spend the money the way he spent it, Phil and I talked a lot about, it's not only about raising the money, but how you spend it. He's definitely spent a lot of money. He put $450,000 of his own money in the race very late to try to avoid the runoff. And so now going forward, we now as Democrats do not have to sort of endure in a costly and what I would have predicted a very divisive runoff. He will now be able to continue to define himself to Georgia. He will continue to talk about issues around what he wants to promote in his campaign. And then also he'll be able to use that money that would have been spent in a runoff to go up against a very well-financed Senator David Perdue for the general election.
Yeah, that's a good point. Phil, Senator Perdue has quite a war chest. Last time around, he ran on that political outsider message. So what's the strategy for him this time around?
The strategy for Senator Perdue is to foster the reopening of this state in terms of getting people back to work and boost the economy again. And I think people in both parties and independents in between want that. Jon Ossoff did run a good campaign, so that was good for the Democrats. What's bad news for the Democrats is he probably was the most radical of the candidates. Journalists for the last few days, for example, have been asking him, are you in favor of defunding the police like a lot of your allies on the left are? He refuses to answer either way. Well, what kind of statesmanship or leadership is that? Give us an answer. So I think he's got some problems, but it'll be very competitive. Both sides are going to be having a lot of money, and as Theron and I, yes, we agree, it's all in how you spend the money.
All good points. And Kathy, I want to talk about the 7th Congressional District. It looks like as some of the more absentee ballots, the more that they come in, Carolyn Bourdeaux is inching more and more towards winning this without a runoff. What are your thoughts on the 7th Congressional?
Well, it ain't over till it's over. Again, for candidates in close races, I feel your pain. To sit here days after the election and not know what your position is really, really difficult. I think both candidates are great candidates. I've been supporting Carolyn because she is really the one who forced the incumbent Republican representative to decide to retire. And I think she's been running great races. But all bets are off. Brenda Lopez has done a great job in her previous roles, and I think the two of them will have an interesting campaign if it comes down to a runoff. But I don't know when we're going to know the results of this, because there's ballots stuck in every corner of this state that need to be counted.
All right. Janelle, on the Republican side, what happened to State Senator Renee Unterman, who lost handedly to emergency room doctor Rich McCormick? What happened?
Well, I do think that she started off kind of behind the eight ball as it relates to getting support and harnessing support. I think people were looking for someone new and fresh during that time for that particular seat. But I wanted to say something that does speak to her being a female candidate and other female candidates that I saw. And I know I didn't talk about the Ossoff race, but I got to highlight this. What's interesting to me about these races is that we're in a time where we have Democrats demanding that the vice president pick for the Democratic side be an African-American female. And yet we keep seeing the same people get elected on the Democratic side, which are white males. Now, mind you, I'm not against white males running for office, obviously. However, I do find it very interesting that Maya Dillard Smith was an African-American female. She came in fourth behind all of the opponents in the Ossoff race that was running, and she raised a lot of money on her side for her, the best she could do, without the support of the Democratic Party. And even back when he ran against Karen Handel in the Democratic primary, then we had Reagan Edwards, was another African-American female who gets pushed to the side. So I think it's really interesting, and we have to look at our female candidates. So even with Renee Unterman, I think we attack our female candidates in a much difficult and harder way. They have to fight a different race, and I think it's time now to really take a deep look into that.
All right, we should mention in the 6th Congressional, no surprise that Karen Handel won without a runoff. It's another matchup between her and incumbent Congresswoman Lucy McBath. Real quickly, though, if I can, moving on to the Fulton County District Attorney's race, where Fani Willis pulled ahead of the long-term incumbent Paul Howard. Now the two will face each other in a runoff. Theron, your thoughts quickly on this race?
Yeah, I think many of us predicted that this race was going to go to a runoff. It looks like it's still a lot of votes to be counted, but the gentleman, Christian Wise Smith, surprised a lot of people. I don't think he surprised himself or his campaign, but he made a last-minute surge, Lori, to get roughly around 23% of the vote. And so his support and his endorsement is going to be so important moving forward in this race. But listen, District Attorney Paul Howard has definitely got an uphill battle on his hand, but he's still in the game, and he's got to figure out a way, if he's going against Fani Willis in the runoff, how he's going to try to deal with the amount of money that she's raised, and also how he can build a new coalition of voters.
Phil, just quickly, do you think a lot of Republican voters did cross over so that they could have a say in this race?
Absolutely. There were no Republican candidates on the ballot last Tuesday in the city of Atlanta, and there was a big push, especially in the Buckhead section of Atlanta, for Republicans to vote for Fani Willis. And the DA is in deep trouble. He's being accused of 3 separate sexual harassment incidents. He's under a criminal probe right now for this phony nonprofit that he set up to give himself money, that these allegations are swirling around him. So he does have an uphill climb, and I'm predicting he'll be toppled and won't be the Democrat nominee.
All right. Well, coming up, more pressure for the Georgia Senate to pass a hate crimes bill. We'll discuss straight ahead.
Join the discussion on the Georgia Gang Facebook page and watch past episodes on the Georgia Gang YouTube channel.
Some of the biggest names in Georgia's business community are now urging Georgia's state senators to pass a hate crimes bill that has already passed the House. This week, Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan said he looks forward to the 11 legislative days to craft a hate crimes bill that will make Georgia the worst place to commit a crime. Phil, you've said for the past few weeks that Republicans on the Senate side were not interested in this bill. Have you heard about any type of shift in their stance?
Well, the only shift is what you just pointed out, Lori, and that is the Lieutenant Governor saying that we need to do something with the bill. I don't know if it's going to be this session, though. I think there was a caveat there. You may have to have time because, as I pointed out, there's a lot of legislators both on the left and the right and the middle that are not happy with the current bill is proposed, because there's a lot of omissions in the bill if you wanted a true hate crimes bill. And I think that if you try to get into amendments, then you're really going to have a problem in both chambers. So I think it might, we've got to do the budget. Remember, that's the top priority. And that is a huge lift as it is. And so, again, 11 days, I think it might have to be transferred over to the next session in January.
But Kathy, considering the events of the last few weeks, how much do you think it could hurt Republicans if they don't get a hate crimes bill passed?
Well, I think it'll hurt them a lot. I mean, they, own the House and the Senate and the governor's office, and if they can't get something this simple through the finish line when it only needs to go through one chamber, I don't know what they can get done. And so I think that's a real problem. I just want to say one thing, too. There's been some cities that have passed resolutions calling for passage of a hate crimes bill, and what I want to say to the people in those cities is your police departments need to be collecting the data on hate crimes and reporting it on the FBI's Uniform Crime Report, and they're not. Only 9 cities or 9 jurisdictions in this state are doing that required reporting. So there's things you can do in your own jurisdiction without waiting on the General Assembly to tell you how to do it. So I'm hoping that those cities that have passed those resolutions will take a look inward and get the job done where they live.
I want to switch gears now. Theron, this week we learned that Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms is being vetted by Joe Biden's campaign as a possible running mate. She's also created an advisory council to examine Atlanta's use of force policies and procedures, and you're co-chairing this. So tell us more about this.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Mayor Bottoms for allowing me to co-chair this Use of Force Advisory Council. We have great co-chairs and a great council. It's really diverse, Lori. She wanted to really make sure that everyone and every voice was represented. And so we had our first call this week, and it went very well. A lot of new and great ideas, and we are very excited about the opportunity to, quite frankly, let a lot of the peaceful protesters be heard. That's one of the things that I called for last week. And we are going to work very, very hard to get some recommendations to the mayor. As far as her being vetted, listen, I said this week, I've done a lot of interviews. I said that Mayor Bottoms was with former Vice President Joe Biden before it was cool to be with Joe Biden, and she even remained steadfast in her support with him when it was unpopular. And so I'm a huge advocate of her being vetted and being on a short list if that's what's happening. I think she would make an outstanding vice president, but I know that she loves her job as being mayor, and so she's being very, very careful not to let the citizens of Atlanta think that she's focusing on this sweepstakes, as we call it, and not focusing on her primary responsibilities, and that is running this great city of Atlanta.
Janelle, one more issue that I want to get to in this block before we have to go, but this week we learned the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of the Army are open to a bipartisan discussion about changing the names of military institutions named after Confederate military men. Now, here in Georgia, they include Fort Gordon and Fort Benning. We know that President Donald Trump came out and said no on this change. What's your opinion on this?
So the way I see it is this. Okay, so renaming buildings, changing movies, removing movies, all of that other stuff, it may soothe the soul, but I don't think it's going to erase the past or the history of our past, right? So I think if we're going to tear down anything, I would like to tear down policies that eliminate parents from having school choice, that forces their students to have to go to failing schools. I want to make sure that we focus on issues that are going to help create economic empowerment for these communities, because that's what changes things. How about getting our businesses back up and running so people can get back to work, so they can create generational wealth? Those are things that matter to me. To me, tearing down statues, changing names, and all that other stuff, yeah, it may make people feel good, but it doesn't erase the history. It doesn't mean that the past is gone. So I think we need to focus on what we need to do today to move forward.
All right, we're out of time, but I want to get the panel to weigh in on this issue another week. So coming up, you know what's next. We'll have winners and losers. Stay tuned.
Time now for the week's winners and losers.
I'm going to go real quickly because I like to give you guys more time. Katie Kirkpatrick, she's my winner. She's been named the new CEO of the Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. I mentioned weeks ago she would be a great candidate to replace Hala Matabalog. Congratulations to Katie and the Chamber for a great choice. Janelle.
Yeah, my winner to this week is General C.Q. Brown. He was confirmed as the first African-American military service chief. I am so proud of him, and we're looking forward to seeing what he accomplishes.
Awesome. Kathy?
I just want to send out our condolences to the Midge Sweet and the family of John Sweet. He passed away. He's a former Atlanta City Council member. We're going to miss him, but his impact is going to be long remembered here in Atlanta.
Okay, and we can move over to Theron.
My first winner is going to be Brandon Reese. He was named this week the chair of the Georgia Chamber of Commerce Government Affairs Council. And then my last winner is going to be Manuel's Tavern, which was listed in the National Registry of Historic Places. And so big shout out to Manuel Maloof and also Robert Maloof, who I learned a lot about today from his son, Steve Maloof, who's a member at Ansley with me.
All right, any more, because we actually have a little bit extra time, I'm being told in my ear. Theron.
Oh, Lord.
Before we get to Phil.
Okay, well, good. Well, my loser is definitely going to be Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. I think that he needs to step up and be a leader and stop blaming counties for a lot of the work that he's responsible for.
All right, Phil, your turn.
Well, I was going to also name Brandon Reese, the chair of the Government Affairs Council of the Georgia Chamber, a great choice. And of course, I agree, Lori, Katie Kirkpatrick with the Metro Chamber. But my winner is President Donald Trump. Last Tuesday, you never read this in the liberal Atlanta Constitution, but he actually polled over 870,000 votes unopposed in the GOP primary. That's the same number that basically all the Democratic candidates for president got, Biden. So all of those nonsense polls showing Biden leading, you can throw those in the wastebasket. Trump has got a great base of support, and that's a true poll.
All right, all good points, everybody. Thank you. And remember, we still have COVID-19 out there. We really haven't been talking too much about it, but we will probably revisit that next week. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, thank you to all of the poll workers who stuck it out and really got us through election night. And thank you to all of those voters who stood in line and braved the elements and the storms and the rain and all of that. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. We will see you again next week. Bye-bye.
The opinions expressed in this broadcast are those of the panelists appearing in this program.